Hello everyone, this is Sergey from Ushanka Show. Thank you for joining me for another episode of my show. We're going to talk more about life in the Soviet Union, and we're going to talk about Soviet life. So this is the magazine that was published in the United States, and this is issue from 1972, August 1972. And by the way, before we start the main topic, housing in the Soviet Union, I want to mention about this gymnast. I think it's for my subscribers. He posted comment that the lady name is Tamara Lazakovich. She was actually she got 4 Olympic medals in 1972 Olympics, I believe 1972. 1 gold for the team, and then silver and 2 bronzes. So she was very successful Soviet gymnast. Unfortunately, she had injury, had to retire in 1973, got into drinking, and she died young at the age of 1938. So this is Tamara Lazakovich, this cover girl for Soviet Life magazine, August 1972. The main topic of today's story, and once again, I said in Soviet Union, they don't make giant titles, it's all tucked away, but we're going to talk about housing program. That's a big article here, and I would like today to actually read and add my comments instead of Brezhnev's speech, which I just read without commenting. There's a lot to talk about. It's really interesting how they present this housing program to the American public, to American readers. Once again, it's loaded with numbers. So it starts here, as you see, it says 2.5 million apartments a year, which sounds like a huge amount, right? It's a lot of apartments. Guess what? I looked up, in the United States, they build about the same amount of individual housing. So 1972 apparently was a peak of construction building in the United States at that time. So they built like 2.4 million single homes. So 2.5 apartments, it's a different animal, and we'll talk about it later. So the numbers looks huge. United States was still way ahead in housing construction in 1972. So, but the article is quite interesting. As I said, I would like to add my comment in. So I probably will do several videos because it's a pretty big article, and there's a lot of the way they present it. It's actually worth talking about. But generally, one thing about Soviet Union housing, it was incredibly cheap. Especially if you have, both parents working, you have a family, not a single person. Of course, in Soviet Union, 100% employment, everyone had to work. So my parents always worked full-time, so both parents were gone. So you have 2 incomes. Your housing expense, like this rent was so cheap. If you pay like 5% of your income for your apartment rent, that's what pretty much was kind of average. So Soviet people, even we were poor, we were comfortably poor because we didn't have to worry about making rent. It was always plenty of money. Like our electric bill quite often was more than actually apartment rent, although apartments were pretty small. So this is kind of nice, and definitely that was a good part. But I believe that's one of the reasons why Soviet Union, what contributed to the Soviet Union collapse is more apartments Soviet government built, the more money they were losing because it was so heavily subsidized that every new apartment, there was another hole in this government budget. So although it was great for people, it sucked a lot of money out of the budget. But it was great, I said, not to worry about once you get an apartment. To get if you make housing so affordable, everyone can afford it. So we had huge waiting lists. Like my family in early 1980s, I had a choice of wait for 20 years to get an apartment, 2-room apartment, which they call it free apartment. You just get in renting, or buying a so-called cooperative apartment in a price. I think my mom told me 25,000 rubles. I was like, we got a giant Soviet-style mortgage. I have a video about it too. It will be below in the comment section. I had a lot of videos about housing. I tried to put them all below in the first comment. So if you're interested in the topic of Soviet housing, I'll be already made a lot of videos. So, but my family, 5 years, we struggled. We shared a small room with another family for 5 years. We lived in the family dorms. And then for about another 5 years, we finally managed to move out and get our own tiny apartment. It was a little small, like hotel-style apartment. We were there for another 5 years. And if my parents wouldn't just decide to bite the bullet and get this cooperative apartment, which, it was a big expense for my mother paid every month now 60 rubles, 50% of her salary. My parents would be still living in a one-room apartment because by the time would be our turn, Soviet Union disappeared and all those waiting lists disappeared with it too. So the article called "Houses Are Built for the People," and as I said, I'll be reading some and then giving my kind of perspective, my thoughts. Housing construction has had priority rating in our country virtually since the revolution. It's not true. There was no housing construction going on for a long time after the revolution, because they had 5 years in Soviet Russia. There was civil war. Then they were busy occupying nearby territories lost after Russia collapsed. So there was not housing construction going on at that time, but there was so-called uplotnение. So in the large cities like Moscow, Leningrad, there used to be St. Petersburg, now St. Petersburg again, Kiev. So in downtown areas, they had nice fancy apartments for rich people. So what they did, if the rich people run away or they got executed or shipped to Siberia, then people will occupy their apartments. So there'll be like apartment with 5-room apartment, right? So there'll be 5 families. So every room will be occupied by a family, and then they share a kitchen and they share one bathroom. And the name was Communal apartments, коммунальные квартиры. So that was going on in every large city. Or, for example, owners will be just forced to move in on one room, and they will put other people at the уплотнение, packing up, and there'll be like 5 more families moving in, taking rooms. Sometimes there'll be 2 families sharing one room. And those communal apartments, they lasted all the way through the history of Soviet Union, the entire almost 70 years. And even after Soviet Union collapsed, there were still, I believe, like 600,000 people in Leningrad. They still lived in a communal apartment. So the housing, although they did a lot building new apartments later, originally that statement is a lie. But they improved some people housing by taking apartments away from rich people and moving in, packing a lot of people in every apartment. The Soviet Union inherited a grossly inadequate volume of housing. I honestly have no idea. Probably, there was nobody cared about poor people and their housing options. Russia was just beginning to industrialize, so the factories just started popping up in the large cities, and workers will be just living in barracks. So for workers, the housing situation was inadequate, but the majority of population, I believe, I don't know, maybe 64 to maybe 80% was villagers, right? Peasants, so they had their own homes in the villages. And then the Nazi invasion left 25 million people homeless. They had a horrible war. A lot of homes were destroyed, but for example, in Kiev, the entire downtown of Kiev was blown up by this retreating Soviets. They installed the mines and they waited till Germans to occupy, and then they blew up the entire downtown Krещатик. Then they blame later on Germans. So, yes, war was Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, so I guess we can blame that was Hitler's fault that 25 million Soviet people became homeless. This is in addition to factors that have touched many other countries: population growth, urbanization, and industrialization. And then I needed to add it, which proceeded at a faster rate in our country than elsewhere. Well, Stalin was doing forced industrialization and forced collectivization. So of course, when it not happen in natural way, but being forced, definitely it can happen faster. The rates and scale of our housing construction were not always the same. Totally correct statement. I said there was barely anything going on initially after the revolution. And during Stalin, okay, I'll tell this a bit later. They were more modest before the war than after 1945, and beginning with the mid-50s, they have been reaching all-time high. And this is really interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but usually in America, when they talk about history, they quite often mention that during Roosevelt administration, during Biden administration, Carter, Reagan, here they don't mention a word of Stalin, talking about pre-19, before 1940s. They could say during Stalin rule, housing situation was like this. Nope, not a single word. There'll be no names mentioned, no surnames, no leaders were mentioned, no Stalin, no Khrushchev. So yeah, they kind of mentioned. So we have for Soviet citizens, we knew looking at any apartment building in large cities when it was built. It was so-called Stalin era buildings, Stalinki. So they were usually maybe 3 to 5 story high. In Moscow, of course, they had some huge fancy ones, but they tend to be kind of fancy. They had a lot of design elements on the outside. They were built slowly, kind of had a quality construction, tall ceilings. That was famous, the Stalin era apartment buildings, but they were built them super slow. So for Stalin, it didn't matter that millions of people are homeless. Usually there was a party elites were getting those apartments. And it's changed drastically under Khrushchev. That's when he actually issued the law that we need to stop building fancy. We need to build fast. And that's when they went to this factory style construction, prefabricated homes. And they'd be assembled like Lego homes, so-called Khrushchevki. Normally 3 story high, or mostly popular was 5 story high Khrushchevka apartment buildings. But once again, they never mention, we all call them Khrushchevki after Nikita Khrushchev, but there'll be nothing mentioned like that in this article, because Americans don't need to know about it. So yeah, it actually took off like crazy. That's one of the huge credits I want to give to Nikita Khrushchev, that he kind of tried to take care of regular Soviet people, and he pushed hard for mass construction to improve Soviet people lives by giving them option to live in their own little apartment instead of share room in a communal apartment, or live in the dorms, or live in the barracks. So that was Nikita Khrushchev, but they don't mention that. So new cities sprang up one after another, mostly in the eastern areas of the country. Old cities also grew rapidly. All told, the urban population rose by 70 million after 1950. Apartment houses, schools, hospitals, kindergartens, stores, and theaters had to be built for all those people, including my parents, Soviet-era baby boomers. My late father was born in 1946. After military service, he moved to Kiev. My mother was born in 1948. After finishing high school in the village, she moved to Kiev to continue her education and to get away from the collective farm life. And then they start prefab apartments. So normally they just call them Khrushchevka, but we don't call them in this magazine. To do that, much building by conventional methods would have been taken an impossibly long time. And this is what Nikita Khrushchev, we have to stop building conventionally. We need to change the technology. We need to start cranking them, making them fast as the apple pies. We had to make drastic changes in design principles and construction techniques to use mostly type designs and to industrialize construction. So once again, because Nikita Khrushchev ordered us to do it. A few hundred apartment houses designs of varying sizes, styles, and layouts that are economical to construct have been drawn up for different climatic areas and to accommodate families of different sizes. Most Khrushchevka were single-room or two-room apartments. My uncle Misha, that I mentioned many times in my videos, he lived in a Khrushchevka apartment on the 5th floor, and I'm planning to make a separate video, but that was the reason why apartment buildings mostly were 5-story high, 9-story high, or 16-story high. So Khrushchevka stop at 5. It's basically, if you go 6 floors, you need to add elevator. And so they stop at 5 to make it the cheapest, the quickest way possible. So people picture, of course, if you're a young person, you got on the 5th floor, it's fine. But if you grew old and you have to still climb on the 5th floor every day up and down, I guess it will keep you in shape, but it becomes challenging. And also, those apartments didn't have a central trash chute. I made videos about that too. So people had to carry their trash down the stairs, the 5th floor, dump it outside in the trash bin. So those are Khrushchevka apartments. Okay. Type designs of panel walls, floors, partitions, plumbing, staircases, landings, and the like made it possible for us to prefabricate as much as 80% of the structure. And I think they hold the record. I think they made one apartment building in 2 weeks or even less from beginning, bringing equipment on site to finished apartment in 2 weeks. So that'll be 5-story high, and maybe you have a single door, and then you got stairs, and you got 4 apartments on each level. So 20 apartments. So they'll have maybe 5 of those central doors. So 100 apartment building in 2 weeks. So they just build by cranes and set them up like Legos. So that's pretty impressive. Quality, probably not there, but whatever it takes. Mechanized assembly greatly reduced construction time. We now have in operation more than 300 large panel prefabrication plants. Actually, my mother worked for a while at one of those. I can't think what was the name. But yeah, that was pretty much, they were designing new apartment buildings, and then they had a factory that, they put together entire walls with windows, and windows ready to be pre-installed at the factory. They put on a truck, kind of funny looking truck with these panels in it like this, and they deliver it to construction site. Cranes pick it up and set it up. So yeah, trying to remember the name. I know the end of the street. So there was a street in Lake Amidan number 3, construction company number 3. My mom worked there for quite a while. But they didn't have apartments available for people who worked there. It's kind of silly. Housing, let's see. Fully prefabricated houses constitute 40% of total volume of state and cooperative housing construction. Housing construction will be further industrialized in the years to come. In some cities, houses are already being built of 1-room and 2-room cubic elements, complete with external and internal finishings. So once again, it's just they pick it up and just the whole 1-room apartment, plop, plop, like Legos. It's pretty crazy, but you need to understand apartments were small, really tiny. The government recently decided to build 25% new big prefabrication factories for the manufacture of cubic elements consisting of ready-made rooms and entire apartments. Experience with cubic elements speaks in favor of this method, which incidentally does not rule out the variety of architecture. While all Khrushchevka pretty much look the same, there's people who actually can recognize different, model numbers, but generally it's the same. 5-story high, no balconies, entry door for apartments at every floor, 2 1-room and 2 2-room apartments, and that's pretty much the same thing all the way up. The older one had asbestos cement shingles and peaked roofs. All newer ones will have a flat roof. Industrialization of construction has played a tremendous role. Consider these figures. In the fourth five-year plan period, so Soviet Union, every time you talk about achievements in history and development and growth of Soviet Union, it goes by five-year plans, by Пятилетка. So that's a key word. I probably should design some T-shirts that says Пятилетка, five-year plan. So in the fourth five-year plan period, which is between 1946 and 1950, once again, here it will be to mention Stalin, not a word, it's just the fourth five-year plan. Just after the war, 2.1 billion square feet of housing was built. So it's kind of interesting. For convenience of the American readers, they converted square meters into square feet. It's very nice on them. In the eighth five-year plan, so that's between 1966 and 1970, 5.6 billion, so huge jump from 2.1 to 5.6. So almost a triple, right? But did you notice they talked about the fourth five-year plan, 1946 to 1950, so Stalin era. Stalin died in 1953. Nikita Khrushchev became leader 2 years later. And then they jump right away to the eighth five-year plan. It's like, what happened to the fifth, sixth, seventh? So 3 5-year plans were gone to make numbers look better for Brezhnev era. Once again, this is 1972 magazine. So Brezhnev already had power for almost 8 years. So they talk about Stalin era when the construction was really slow, and then jumps right away to Brezhnev, skipping completely when the construction took off. From 1956 till 1964, when Khrushchev was the leader, that's when it took off. That's really was, they built like more housing in the first several years than all the years before. All that 40 years prior, they built more. That's how this mass construction of cheap housing was growing. But here they kind of instantly jump, skipping completely Khrushchev era, but it should be credit to Nikita Khrushchev. So I looked it up. I also did square feet for you guys. So between 1956 and 1964, Soviet Union added 5.4 billion square feet of new housing, which is about 13 million new apartments, about 1.5 million new apartments every year. A lot of apartments. And the record was in 1959, 2.2 million. So it was already going strong under Khrushchev and was keep on going under Brezhnev, but they just, Nikita Khrushchev was removed from mentioning it all. Very nice. Very nice, very nice. This growth was mostly a result of new technology. No matter how hard builders worked in the first post-war years to house the homeless, oh my goodness, they mentioned there's a homeless people in the Soviet Union. Wow. They could not hope to meet the shortage with the old methods. Well, you all saw pictures, I'll add it right here, the beautiful apartment buildings, so-called Five Sisters in Moscow. Super fancy, super duper cool. So if you build apartments like that, yes, there's no way you can house all the homeless in 10,000 years, because those are just elaborate, slow to build, super fancy. So Comrade Stalin really didn't care about how many. He wanted these grandeur looking apartments. Okay. Instead of square feet or floor space, let us use more graphic figures. In the past 10 years, about 100 million citizens have moved to new or better housing. So this is interesting. I'm not sure what they mean about better housing. Soviet Union builds about 2.5 million apartments a year. As I said, in 1972, United States built 2.4 million single homes. And the square footage was like triple. So every American single home was triple the size of the average Soviet apartment. According to United Economic Commission in Europe, for every 1,000 of population in 1969, Soviet Union built 9.3 apartments. France 8.5, and Britain 6.7. Now, once again, I don't think it was so much going on in construction out in the country. Single homes were not that growing because people had to build themselves out of their pocket cost. Moscow builds an annual 120,000 apartments. So once again, capital of the Soviet Union, sure, they build a lot. In the past 10 years, its housing fund had doubled, and the average living floor area for Muscovites had grown by 50%. Once again, this is all Soviet kind of propaganda. It's a lot of numbers, and it's saying if you're not a number guy, you're going to lose interest to this really quickly. All right, one more chapter, and then we're going to wrap up for this one. It's already look like we're about 25 minutes. Special ministries are responsible for both industrial and residential construction. So the article, the next chapter called "Who Builds Apartment Houses?" Really good question. So these ministries direct big building trusts and territorial agencies that have the necessary equipment and personnel. In Moscow, Glavmoststroy is probably the biggest building firm in the world. In the capital alone, it builds annual 100,000 apartments. And the remaining 20,000 are constructed by building organizations and various industrial plants and commercial offices. And a great many schools, hospitals, stores, kindergartens, and other buildings. Leningrad, Kiev, hey, they mentioned my hometown, and other major cities also have similar building trusts. About 3/4 of all housing construction is financed by the state. No private at all. So no private money at all involved. So like when we say, and Soviet government put a lot of effort to build all these homes, well, no one else could. It's like, sure, I can give you credit for building so many, but also, let's be honest, you didn't let anybody else to build apartment buildings. It was only government or no one. So about 3/4 of all housing construction is financed by the state, usually from the budgetary allocations. About 20% of the state housing construction is paid out of the housing fund, to which factories and businesses assign part of their profits. So once again, state-owned businesses. The economic reform of several years ago helped the housing situation considerably. Now, the more profit a factory makes, the more apartments it can build for its workers. I wonder which economic reform they're talking about. Maybe it was Kosygin reform, but now it's basically, yeah, if you make more profit, you can direct that profit to build more apartments for your own workers, which in case of my father worked at Antonov Aviation Factory, it's like a Boeing for Ukraine, and they had 20 years waiting list in that factory, so they were hardly getting any apartments for that large, cool factory. About 6% of the housing is built by cooperatives. Hey, that's the one we end up getting. And the remainder by collective farmers and individuals, all on long-term loans from the state. So it's hard to say. So 6% cooperatives, and the remainder, I need to do some math. But anyway, we're gonna stop right here. So and this is what you probably saw those many times, Soviet apartments. I said, better than nothing. I definitely don't miss life in an apartment. I prefer my own house, although there's always headaches. If roof leaks, you gotta fix that yourself. Your basement leaks, you have to fix yourself. So it's a lot of responsibilities, but definitely way more space, way more comfort. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a part 1 for our housing story. There'll be a couple more. If you have any questions, please post in the comments. I'll try to answer them in my next video. Thank you so much for watching Ushanka Show. До побачення. Goodbye.